Hi, welcome to Psychology Matters. We're glad that you're joining us. I'm Dianne Bradley, and Psychology Matters is a show about different psychology topics, issues, mental health issues, and it really is our goal to share with you as much as we can by professionals, and in this case today, a licensed professional counselor, Trent Hughes.
Hello.
And Trent, it's good to have you back.
It's wonderful to be back. Thank you for having me.
Did it seem like we just got started talking about addiction when we ran out of time last time?
There's never enough time.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I think that we ended the show just with, that serious note of what a serious matter this is. It's a crisis in Tennessee, addiction. And just the numbers of people and the families that this hits. And I had some questions about a couple of other kinds of addictions that we didn't talk about yet. And I see this fairly often, particularly in teens and adolescents. And that would be heavy use or even addiction of marijuana.
Absolutely.
And most say it's not something you get addicted to.
Right.
So I'm not addicted.
Right.
And it's probably going to be legal anyway, right? Have you heard this before?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So can you share with us a little bit about what you know about adolescents and the use of marijuana?
Absolutely. The thing about working with adolescents who smoke marijuana, oftentimes it's considered to be, many people call it a gateway drug, but one of the reasons is because it's fairly easily accessible to teenagers, and it feels like somewhat of a safe drug. It's just smoking, like smoking a cigarette or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they have a bit easier time saying, hey, I want to try this drug. And so in the beginning, when they start using marijuana, they really start they start using it, basically saying that this is something that it's from the earth. It's something that's going to be legal.
It's not that big of a deal.
It's not that big of a deal.
I'm the only one not doing it anyway,
right? My friends are doing it, and there is a lot of peer pressure to conform to the cultural norms of society, and so they begin justifying their use and saying, well, if everybody else is doing it, I can try it too. And because it's not extremely invasive, just from using it, they will become social users. And what they don't really realize is the true impacts that it's having on their development during that time.
Yeah, and an example of that I recall with a client, a teen. Well, he might have been a little bit older than a teen. I think he had started college. And one of the things he said to me was, well, I started smoking when I was in middle school, and I never stopped. And we were talking about what he did with his friends, socializing, and imagining what it would be like to not be smoking marijuana, not be smoking pot, that's what he said. And he asked me the question, he said, well, what would we talk about? Just guys sitting around? What would we talk about? That's weird. And my response was, I think you missed out on the awkward stages that you might needed to go through earlier instead of using marijuana to make it easier for you.
Right.
And so you didn't learn how to navigate that and how to be a little more comfortable or communicate without using it. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that?
Absolutely agree with that. We talk about many times that you hear in working with addiction in any population, even as they get into adulthood, oftentimes we'll say, and research indicates that many times when people start using at that young age, teenage age, sometimes even younger, they stop developing emotionally. So they, at that point, get stuck, and they start using that coping skill that they learned to navigate through the difficult things in life and socially become awkward.
Yeah, and that's really hard. That's really hard. I mean, I know I went through a lot as a teen. We all have,
Absolutely.
right? And by the way, I
And
couldn't find
so
marijuana
we're
when
so
I was a
glad that
teen.
you're
That was a
joining
long
us
time ago,
today
but
for Psychology
that's
Matters
really
and
hard
hear about
if you
addiction,
don't move
learn about
through
addiction.
your
I certainly
natural
enjoyed it. There's
developmental
so much
stages
that
without something like marijuana or all the many other things. If you don't move through that, then that makes sense that you would be stuck emotionally, and the emotional level would be more, say if you're older, 19, 20, 21, and you're still operating at 14 years old.
Absolutely.
That's got to be hard.
Absolutely. And that's where we get to go back and revisit, this is where you stop developing. So let me teach you some psychoeducation on how to deal with anxiety. We just start there. And so we'll use different tools to start navigating, identifying the emotion that's associated with anxiety.
Right.
Because there's no skill attached to understanding
Right.
identification of emotions.
Right, yeah, that's really interesting. Well, let's shift over into alcoholism,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Don't
Are
mind.
you okay with that?
Absolutely.
So I find that that's another area that's very difficult, for people to navigate, for families to navigate, for the person dealing with alcohol addiction, even for the therapist to be able to call it out when it's not been called out before. And I don't know about you. I don't know if you've ever been involved in an intervention. You have?
Absolutely.
Okay. So what I learned is that in interventions, especially with the person who is alcoholic, if they're not taken to the place where they're going to get treatment immediately, the whole story changes.
Absolutely.
They change their mind. Is that right?
They, when they are in that crisis mode and they need change and they're scared, they're afraid, they have consequences waiting for them, they will sit and have a conversation, and if we're in that intervention, we'll have a conversation with them about the risks involved and the seriousness of what's happening in this moment. And if you don't, oftentimes I'll tell family members, especially if they're theirs, I'll tell them, right now, immediately get him somewhere for detox. Because if you don't, then a couple of hours from now, one of two things: they'll be gone, you won't be able to find them for a day, a couple days, staying with a friend or whatever, or they'll start using again to cover up that intense intervention that you just had. It's their coping skill, remember.
There we go again with the coping skill. So, okay, let me ask you about this. So, I'm a systemic therapist and work with different members of a system like a family. And what we find is that when there are family members who have another family member who is alcoholic in the family, perhaps in denial, the people in the family have a relationship with the alcoholic behavior.
Right.
They don't have a relationship with the person.
That's right.
So have you seen that as well?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
And teaching family members and teaching individuals who struggle with
Hi,
alcoholism,
welcome to Psychology
it's
Matters.
really
It's good
interesting
to have
because
you
when
here.
you start
I'm Dianne
getting a little
Bradley.
bit closer and separating from the identified substance, it all falls under some of the same categories.
Yep.
And that means that one thing that I teach people is if you could imagine the identified alcoholic being in a bubble, and that bubble represents addiction. Just on the other side of that bubble, you have family, you have friends, and when they look at that individual, all they see is the addiction. They see the behaviors, they see how they act. And so oftentimes we'll talk about, I bet you can pick up warning flags, those red flags, those yellow flags of when a relapse is about to occur because that person's operating in addictive behaviors.
Right.
So it's easy for family members to see a lot more, but they only see that individual as the addict or alcoholic in this case.
Right, because the behaviors are so big. And I think what happens is other family members find themselves rearranging themselves in their lives just to coexist, walking on the eggshells, trying to predict what's going to happen. Sometimes there's hypervigilance with
Right.
the children or the spouse.
Right.
So what do you do with family members when you have that and they have been doing, they've had behaviors where they're protecting, covering up,
Right.
excusing, maybe apologizing on behalf of, cleaning up the alcoholic's mess? How do you work with the family members to understand and see how they're part of the addiction cycle when they do that?
One of the things that we do is talk about the importance of recognizing how addiction works for that individual.
Right.
And many times it's across the board in terms of there's a ritual that occurs. There's a ritualistic behavior.
Yep.
And for each individual, and many are similar, when they begin operating in addictive behaviors, it's the same thing. They don't just use, they think about using, they prepare their day thinking about using. So they might pick up the phone at 7 o'clock in the morning to make a phone call, and that happens every day, that they need to go and find their drug of choice. Or if it's alcohol, they'll get in their car first thing in the morning if they don't have anything in the fridge or in the cabinet, and they'll go and they'll seek out
Make sure that
alcohol.
it's there.
Make sure that it's there. So we begin teaching family members how to identify, and really kind of for accountability, we teach them how to identify some of those addictive behaviors to help hold their family member accountable. And that's really tricky because you have a lot of defense mechanisms.
Oh, yeah.
You have a lot of people hurt, and so it can really end up in an argument. So the next thing we do is talk about how to set healthy boundaries. When is it your responsibility? When is it responsibility of the individual who's struggling with the alcoholism?
And I would imagine in some cases you might even have to have a safety plan.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, I can think of times when I've been very careful in moving toward calling that out with a client and saying the word out loud, and it's not been said in the family before. And once I say it the first time, I'm going to say it the second and the third and the fourth until, you know, the realization sets in.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but I often hear stories or justifications and explanations of how unique their situation is, and therefore they wouldn't fit that category.
That's right. They think that many people that come in struggling with addiction, they believe that their unique experience is one of a kind.
That's right.
Nobody understands me. Nobody gets me. But that's the wonderful thing about treatment, is once they get in and we start working with not only the individual but their family members, we start aligning them with a group of people.
Well, they have unique experiences too.
Oh my goodness, it happened to me too. It normalizes their experience, and it takes that isolation off the table, which is a huge factor in working with anybody struggling with addiction. So there's that isolative behavior. We start teaching how to avoid isolating, because when people isolate, they want to use, because they don't want to use in public, because they fear judgment, and they know oftentimes when they have began treatment that what they're doing is unhealthy.
And I don't know about you, but it seems to me that with alcoholism, often what accompanies it in the behavior can be anger and rage, whereas in some of the drug addictions, that's less likely. Not that it doesn't occur with some or different people, but we definitely see that a lot in alcoholic use.
Right. Really interesting to think too, different substances affect people in different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so one of the things that we really want to remember is when somebody's experiencing anger or rage, it's just a way to separate themselves from the other person. It's a defense mechanism. And it can be really dangerous, because when they start raging, if they're under the influence, that's when really scary things can happen, not just for the individual, but for the family members that are around them.
So, because this is such a big problem, you know, whether it be the drug epidemic or whether it be alcoholism, I'm sure that some of the viewers know people that would fall in this category, or know people who have family members, or they may even themselves have family members or self.
Mm-hmm.
So what if we just kind of talk out maybe a strategy for the person that recognizes it in another person?
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll talk about the other strategy. I hear this in myself.
Yeah.
So how can we help the person that may be watching that is thinking, gosh, that all sounds good, but how do I get this person the help that they need?
Right. The first thing we have to do is recognize that approaching a loved one, a family member, or even a friend to address their potential addictive behavior is very scary, because you don't really know for sure, especially if you've not been around it to treat it, but you suggest the idea. It can really, the number one, when you talk about step work, the first step is talking about denial.
Right.
So you have to be prepared for denial, but the thing about it is many times people who need treatment, they know they need help, and they don't recognize that other people see it. When a family member or a friend offers the idea, do you think you have a problem? I think you have a problem. Or how would you say that? It's a simple letting them know how you feel about what their behaviors are. How you feel, it's scary. It concerns me. I think it might be good to consider. Things like this, you have to present it, because if you don't, who else is going to do it?
Right.
So you just have to put it out there.
Right. Do you ever recommend putting together an intervention team, especially when it's a big issue and maybe the person with the alcoholism or drug issue, I don't know, is bigger or stronger than the people around that see it and are impacted by it? Do you ever recommend a professional intervention team to come in?
Sometimes it's extremely necessary, because the identified addict or alcoholic, they're in such great denial, and sometimes they reign supreme in their family system, and other family members are really afraid to even confront it, and sometimes it can be dangerous to confront it. So in those cases, it is most important to reach out to a mental health professional or an interventionist who can actually talk them through or offer ideas or even stage an intervention for that person. So I'd certainly say in some cases it's definitely recommended versus even suggesting, I think you have a problem.
Okay. So let's shift into the ideas for the person who may be watching and knowing silently, I'm dealing with this and I do have a problem. Let's see if we can, step the process out as to what this person could do for him or herself. What would be the best first step?
I think I want to make sure that individual knows that wherever they are in the addictive process, if they think they have it managed, there could potentially be fooling themselves and tricking themselves, because how much do you drink today? How much do you drink every day? Different people experience it in different ways, and once you cross that addictive line, there's no going back.
Right.
So if the person is listening today and they're concerned they have an addiction but not really talking about it with anybody, the least they could do is contact a treatment facility or a therapist anonymously and say, here's some of the things I'm doing. How much are you drinking? Those are the things. How much are you using? Those are the questions that will be asked to them. Many times you can go to treatment facility websites, or you can just simply Google assessments and take your own little small assessment just to get an idea
And find
of
out.
if you're addicted or not.
Okay, so let's say that's happened. This person is like, oh, okay, and Googles and is checking, and there's this knowing that I do have a problem, and I don't want to have a problem, and I'm afraid, and I'm scared. This is how I get through life.
Right.
What's the next step?
The next step can be the scariest, because in order to be successful in recovery, you have to begin talking about it.
Right.
So if that person feels as though they are struggling with addiction, try to find the best and closest person they know who is sober, preferably, but if not, you can speak with them too, and just let them know, I'm concerned.
Let the secret out.
Let the secret out.
Mm-hmm.
Just start talking about it just to one person. That's all that's necessary. Somebody you're safe with, somebody you trust, and maybe have that person take you and go with you to the next step, contacting a facility or a clinician for additional help.
Okay. So my next question has to do with some of us have insurance, some of us have great financial resources. Mm-hmm. Some of us, that could be a really hard step.
Absolutely.
So where can these people turn if they don't have those financial resources and get help?
Yeah. I would say number one thing is just about any treatment facility that they contact. If they've heard of a treatment facility, and even if they don't have insurance for that particular facility, still contact them, because at the least they might do an assessment, or they could give you some proper referrals to places that could help you. There's some great resources around our area that provide addiction treatment for people who have no income, who have no insurance, and there is help out there for those people too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then sometimes we use the word comorbidity. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should break that down and explain to our viewers what we mean by that, because that kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. Would you mind doing that?
Sure. When people come in and they get treatment, oftentimes they'll use whatever substance, say it's opiates, or say it's marijuana, or say it's cocaine, or say it's alcohol, any drug, and they'll often feel an experience of anxiety, depression. Things like that are really common things that we see. And here's something really interesting. Oftentimes when they get clean and sober, we find that anxiety and depression, it goes away.
Yeah,
it goes away.
Interesting?
It's related to the substance use.
Mm-hmm.
However, if it's not something that goes away, that comorbidity is something that we can also address. And they can get a referral to a psychiatrist, they can see their doctor, and they'll work with a therapist to be able to address those underlying comorbid experiences.
So comorbidity means when there's more than one issue going on.
Right.
Yeah.
When there's more than one, not just substances, but some type of mental health issue that's happening. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a twofold, if you will, sometimes more, because it depends on how many things are going on.
And this is whenever I find myself working with, say, a couple and doing marriage counseling, if one of them has an issue with a substance or alcohol, and I mean an issue, not an every once in a while something, but an issue, we can't really do good work until we address that.
That's got to come first.
Yeah. The
key, and this is so important to remember, that the key to recovery is, number one, stabilizing in recovery. Mm-hmm. The other comorbid pieces that might be going on is something where that will need to be addressed, and sometimes in early recovery it will be addressed. But oftentimes stabilization from substance use it has to come first, because nothing else can be addressed unless they stop using. Mm-hmm. Because again, that using, it is a coping skill. It's a symptom of the underlying issues, and that comes later on in recovery.
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot. You've shared a lot here in this episode and a previous episode, and I'm hoping that our viewers have learned so much. So if I skip anything, if I miss a step, will you clean me up here?
Absolutely.
So what we want to say is that if you have a family member or know someone that you're close to, or not even close to, and you want to help, the first thing is, if it's safe, to bring it up, to express concern that there is an issue that you see, that there's something, I don't know, whatever the substance is, that's getting in the way of being healthy and healthy relating.
That's
Fair
right.
enough?
That's right.
That's the first step. The next step would be encouraging, finding someone to help, going to a treatment center, calling, even Googling, And even if you get one that is not in your means, financial means, likely you can find help.
No doubt.
They will share
Always.
resources.
Yeah.
Okay. If it is you yourself, same sort of thing. You've got to let the secret out. There's a lot of shame attached to this, isn't
Big
there?
time. A whole nother topic.
A whole other topic. See, you could come back again. So being able to talk to at least one person, preferably someone who is sober, and then start that journey toward finding someone that can help. And lastly, an intervention for a family member who needs it.
That's right.
So I really appreciate you being here
Thank
today,
you for
Trent.
having me.
It's really good to talk about these things,
Absolutely.
and sometimes we forget how serious it
It
is
is
in the
very
work that we
serious.
do.
That's right.
So
Very true.
thank you.
Thank you for having me again.
Well, thank you, viewers. It's been good to have you viewing us, Psychology Matters, and I hope that we have shared something very helpful. Be sure to watch for us on Facebook, like us, and I don't know, share a link. Send us your comments. Send us your questions. We're so glad to have you. Watch for future episodes, and goodbye.